Welcome everybody. Today, thank you so much for being here and making time. We're going to get started shortly as soon as I get myself organized. All right, I think I'm pretty organized now. Well, welcome to the 34th Annual Peer Mediation Conference. Adventures in Peer Mediation is the theme for this year. My name is Jose Barzola from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. This year's Peer Mediation Conference is brought to you as a collaborative of 22 different organizations around Hawaii that support this conference that is spread out throughout the month of April. Just want to make sure one of my colleagues will be handling the wait list and let people in as I continue on. The Peer Mediation Conference will consist of an opening panel, 16 skill workshops, and a closing panel. You can definitely learn more about all the events on eventbrite.com under the Matsunaga Institute for Peace. Our event will focus on an opening panel to the conference in the Adventure Begins. Thank you so much for joining us today. This event will be today we will learn about peer mediation programs throughout Hawaii, from developing, managing, and training youth to be successful peer mediators in schools 3rd to 12th grade and organizations outside of the schools too. Peer mediation is problem solving by youth with youth. It is a process by which 2 or more students involved in a dispute meet in a private, safe, and confidential setting to work out problems with the assistance of a trained mediator. We're going to start today's event by introducing our special guest for our panel. Moderating today's event is Katie Ranney, who is a peace builder, facilitator, and conflict resolver. She is currently working as the special programs coordinator at the Mediation Center of the Pacific. She's responsible for conducting outreach and training, as well as program creation and management. As an independent facilitator and communication consultant for the last 13 years, Katie has worked mostly with nonprofits and government agencies to create substantial plans to strengthen and advance their endeavors. She graduated summa cum laude from Santa Clara University and earned her master's in communication from UH Manoa with a grad certificate in conflict resolution right here at the Matsunaga Institute. She's interested in the development and practice of empathy, as well as how digital communication helps groups connect and organize, and hopes to apply it to her work at home in Hawaii. Our panelists today consist of Shelly Andrews, who is a Kailua High School high-risk counselor who facilitates the KHS Peer Mediation Program and Positive Coping Skills group, while also managing the KHS 504 program and providing counseling service for students with disabilities since 2003. Shelly also has a master's degree in counseling and guidance received in 2000 and a grad certificate in conflict resolution received in 2017 from right here as well, the Matsunaga Institute. She's a national board certified teacher in counseling and guidance received in 2008. Before working as a counselor in Kailua High School, Shelly worked at Chaminade University, the Institute for Human Services, the Access Line, and Camp Ukulea. One of our other panelists today is Majida Labar, who is a program manager at Koakake Mediation Center on the Big Island of Hawaii, where she teaches and develops curriculum for peer mediation and coordinates community workshops and trainings. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from Washington State University and Master's of Arts in International Relations from the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. Also joining us is Sue Chang, who since 1989 has trained over 1,000 of school students, both public and private, their adult advisors, teachers, support, and administrative personnel, and parents in conflict management techniques, such as mediation, negotiation, and managing bullies. Focusing definitely primarily on the elementary school level, Sue has also been instrumental in organizing Hawaii's annual Peer Mediation Conference since its beginning. And finally joining us is Noelani Anderson, who is from Hamakua on the island of Hawaii, currently holds the position of Peer Mediation Coordinator at the West Hawaii Mediation Center with a background in peace studies and theater education. Noelani enjoys finding innovative ways to approach conflict resolution using art, culture, and the nature around us to inspire creative solutions. Well, to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to our good friend, Katie Ranney. Katie.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who's come today to listen to the opening panel for this month of peer mediation. We hope that you learned something today and all throughout the month of April. We are going to start with Shelly Andrews, who is going to be talking about a successful peer mediation program at Kailua High School. Shelly. Oh, sorry, one step before that, we do have the chat enabled. So if a question does pop into your mind during this, please type it into the chat I will be monitoring that, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if several of you have the same question, we'll be able to batch it all right at the end. So click on the chat in the menu screen, and I will be looking at that. So thank you. With that bit of logistics, Shelley, take it away.
Yay, thanks so much for the great introduction, Jose and Katie. My journey or adventure in peer mediation, which I wanted to share with you today, started back in 2000. I was actually an intern here at Kailua High School. And my supervisor, counselor at the time, his name was Roger Coloma, asked me on maybe the third or fourth day that I came to school was, had I had any experience with mediation? And I said, I actually wanted to say yes, but I really couldn't. I couldn't say that I had. So I said, okay, no, not really. And so he's like, okay, let me put you with one of the student mediators and you can shadow them. And it was just kind of interesting to be doing graduate work in counseling and to be actually shadowing a group of high school peer mediators and watching them in the process of mediating. So I was just probably in awe, just watching the kids as they ran through the mediation. They were all very professional, probably handled the situation way better than I probably could have, even though I had over like a year and a half worth of counseling experience under my belt and a psychology major. These high school students were just rocking it. And they probably did maybe about 3 or 4 mediations that I got to shadow within maybe it's like a 2 or 3 day period. And then Roger got back to me and asked me what I thought. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I really love this program. I actually love the program so much that when I graduated from UH Manoa, I actually worked at Chaminade University for a little bit. And then I got rehired at Kailua High School as a high-risk counselor in 2003. Unfortunately, while I wanted to continue with peer mediation, Roger had left. The principal had left. Most of the counselors that I had worked with as an intern had left. And so while I really wanted to rebuild his program, I never really quite got it to that same probably level that I got to see back in 2000. I have been, though, since 2003, able to train lots of different mediators. I have been able to get them the skills that they need to handle mediations in their personal lives. It's been actually just one of the things that's kind of opened up my world, just to give kids that opportunity to help themselves and help their communities and just see this positive change in their lives. I think it's also helped me as a counselor as well. Learning these mediation skills has helped me not only as a student intern back in 2000 when I was so impressed with these student mediators that were leading these mediations, but myself in my own practice, going back to school with the Matsunaga Center and getting my graduate certificate in conflict resolution really helped my counseling practice as well. So I'm all about peer mediation. I love it. I teach basically, since 2003, I basically got Roger's program back to however I could. You know, I wasn't able to, there wasn't as much buy-in because we had new staff on campus, but I have been able to train, gosh, hundreds of, like I said, kids in mediation techniques. I've had lots of help with a lot of people here, especially Sue Chang, who's run the Peer Mediation Conference every year, and we love going to that. The kids, I think, like just learning that they can help themselves. They like seeing that they can be, leaders on campus. Most times what I've learned is that peer mediators are not the typical student leader that you'll see on campus. They're the kids that might be getting into a little bit of trouble a little bit. They're usually very smart, but they actually want to help. And just not that typical, kid that you might see that's maybe planning a prom or something like that. Let's see, what else can I tell you about my program? I guess I was just worried at one point that I wouldn't be able to get the program like I said, back to the way it was like when I first witnessed the student peer mediators when I first started at Kailua High School. But I think it now, even though we are not able to do a number of the, I think on average, the number of peer mediations when I first started at Kailua as an intern was probably about like, maybe about 100, maybe like 100 to 200 mediations per school year. What I've witnessed is we've only been able to do maybe, 3 to 5 mediations a year, which has just been tough because what's happened is within the DOE, most times administrators nowadays are entrusting mediations to counselors instead of students. There's a little bit of worry over like litigation and wondering if kids can really handle mediation. So a lot of times mediators will, once they get to the training, will handle mediations in their, like I said, personal lives, maybe with their families. And then maybe use those skills further into the future. So that's been one of the struggles, I guess, trying to get that mediation back to the level that it was, but I do appreciate the opportunity to still teach the kids the skills. Let's see, what else can I tell you about it? One of the things that's been hard as well is been during the COVID-19 lockdowns. So whereas before I would teach peer mediation, I am a full-time school counselor. So this is kind of like my side gig that I do for fun. I would lead this actual class for credit. So the kids actually come in, it's the CCRN and the DOE is called Peer Education Program. And I think I'll send my link if anyone wants to check out my website, but basically I meet with the kids once a week. We teach them conflict management skills during the class, during lunch period. With the COVID-19 lockdowns, we weren't able to do lunch periods anymore, so everything went online. So I basically was able to, along with a lot of other teachers, the struggle was real. We were able to develop Google Classrooms for all of our classes this school year. So I did the same thing with my peer education program class. We still meet once a week. Now it's at 1 o'clock. I'm hoping that you guys can listen into some of the sessions that they'll be teaching. There's 2 coming up tomorrow on Thursday. But basically we're teaching them the same conflict management skills that I was teaching them at lunch in person. Now it's all moved online to Google Classroom. So very exciting to have that ability to still have the classes. I do miss the kids. Kailua High School has moved to a hybrid schedule. So we just started welcoming back students about a month and a half ago, right before spring break. And I am able to see some of my peer mediators. Some of them have told me that it has been useful for them to learn the peer mediation strategies online, which has been nice. It's nice to get that positive feedback because sometimes living in a virtual world, just like this conference, great that we have this opportunity, but just not the same, right, as in-person contact. But we do what we can, right? And I found that it has been valuable, and the kids that have come to the training, that's actually been one of the positive things about it, because things have moved online. Even though we're in a hybrid schedule, I still keep the class online because some students don't feel safe coming to school and still want to do distance learning. So because it's online this school year, I've actually had more peer mediators this year interested in taking the class and earning the credit and learning those skills. So typically I'll start off with about 20 kids. This year I actually had almost 30. So really, really exciting stuff. I'm happy that I got more students involved this year. I'm happy we can still do this conference because it's something that they do look forward to every year. And again, if you can support one of the students and watch one of their little workshops, I know they would really appreciate it. I know they're really nervous, but I just love to see the kids at work and using their leadership skills and the skills, mediation skills that they've learned in the class. And so if you can support them, it'd be amazing. Let's see. I guess just like my journey ends, just to conclude it with just like seeing how far this has kind of come with me starting as an intern and seeing that, wow, okay, there's this new thing called mediation, and kind of leading me on this journey that really has so much to do with counseling, nothing to do with counseling in a way, but it's really kind of changed my world as a counselor. And I appreciate like all the relationships that I've developed over the years. First with Miss Sue Chang, who's run the Peer Mediation Conference for so many years and just been a big supporter of our program here at Kailua High School. We would have never been able to continue the program without her help. Also, her being a Kailua High alumni, I think makes it nice because she remembers us all the time to invite us to these conferences once a year. I would have never gone back to school to get my graduate certificate in conflict resolution if it wasn't for the peer mediation conferences. So because of the peer mediation conferences and that training, that's how I met Jose and many of the people here with the Matsunaga Center. So it really has changed my life in that way, and just getting new training and learning how I can, I guess, just reinforce my practice as a school counselor. I think peer mediation can change the world. It definitely has changed my life. And that is my adventure in peer mediation.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I really appreciate it on giving us a overview of your journey. You mentioned before that this past year was only about 5 to 10 mediations in the year. How many mediations do the students usually do in a school year?
So it just kind of depends. It's kind of been up and down. And so, yeah, I would say maybe, yeah, about, what was it, did I say 5 to 10? It can depend. Sometimes it'll be, like 3, and those are official ones that are held in the counseling center. And those are the ones that I would count, but I can't put a number on the ones, that are done personally, like through, like friend to friend, like they're not within the counseling center. And the reason for that is just liability, that we, a lot of the heavy mediations, the vice principals would rather handle on their own or have a counselor handle. So yeah, I would say with the 3 to 10 would probably be the best estimate I can give.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. And now we're going to be moving to our next speaker, Majida, who is with Kuikahi Mediation Center, and she's going to be talking a little bit about the online experience with peer mediation and how that adds another component and another level to it.
Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Jose, for hosting this and putting this together. This is the first time I've personally participated in Peer Mediation Conference, so it's really a joy because I've heard it so many times. Oh, the Peer Mediation Conference, and so it's really nice to have it online as well, because I'm on the Big Island. So as Katie and Jose said, my name is Majida Labar. I'm the program manager here at Kuikahi Mediation Center, where we serve the east side of Hawaii. They have another mediation center over on the west side, which Noelani is going to speak about later. So we piloted our elementary peer mediation program in 2014. And since then, we've worked with about at least 8 schools with peer mediation, and then 3 different others with our conflict resolution skills trainings that we do. So this year, we offered peer mediation at the middle school level, and that was a first for us, as well as having the peer mediation training online. We trained 9 middle school students in peer mediation. And I'm just going to share with all of you some of the great things about teaching online, and then also some of the challenges as well, because it's a little bit of a mixed bag of both. And of course, with this time that we're in right now, it's important to be socially distant so everyone can feel comfortable. And so having peer mediation online was a really natural way to fulfill that. We used Zoom, but platforms such as WebEx and Google Meets are all viable as well. So each platform has its advantages and disadvantages. And ultimately what matters is, you know, which one like you feel more comfortable using, are able to access, and what has the features that you need. So Zoom and WebEx cost, whereas Google Meets, I believe, is free. So, you know, it's the little factors that we have. But because the Kuhikahi has mediations online, we already have a Zoom account. So we were able to utilize our Zoom account in order to have the training online. So when using any of these platforms, one of the things to consider is the bandwidth. As my counterpart, Noelani, at West Hawai'i Mediation Center let me know, it takes a lot of bandwidth to run WebEx. So simple things like that all need to be taken into consideration, because not all students have access to a steady, reliable internet. So, and I'm sure most teachers already are aware of this, and I'm sure I'm just reiterating what you already know in that aspect. So most of the initial setup of peer mediation just remains the same, you know, figuring out scheduling, getting parental permission for things, picking the right students to be peer mediators. So how we kind of do our training is the mediation center, myself, I go in and I teach the peer mediators and train them. But I work with someone like Shelly at Kailua High School. I work with a counselor. So like Shelly, she has like such this big job, because the counselors are so important in getting a lot of things set up, and just having that contact with the students, that it makes it that much easier to have a good counselor, that working with a good counselor. So getting the Zoom links to the students, the workbook, any other documents, that was all working with the counselor. I didn't want to have any student emails. I'm like, I don't want your email address. I just, you know, I didn't want to take on that liability. So working closely with the counselor in order to get all those documents to them. So any and all documents going to the students, I printed out for them beforehand, and I gave to the counselor, and then the counselor then would get that to the students. And I thought it was important to have for students to have that paper copy of their workbook, because, you know, it's that nice, like, tangible in your hand thing. So that was one of the things that I made sure they had a paper copy of, was the workbook. But that there is the option to share documents. You know, you can share documents via Zoom. You could do Google Docs. You could do it Dropbox. And perhaps you can do a hybrid of all of those things. We thought it was important for students to have something physical in their hand, because, you know, as much as these kids are tech savvy today, I didn't want to be dependent upon that assumption. Because some students actually can't navigate technology as well as we think. So to have that kind of balance, because some students are really good at it and can, like, you know, handle it, and then some, you know, have a hard time. And so balancing that out. And the training itself was so fun. Like, for me, the teaching the peer mediation is just so fun. And the middle school students, to me, are like the funnest. So what we did is we recorded all of the sessions, and it wasn't anything to go out publicly, or even to the student, or to other students that weren't peer mediators. It was solely for the purpose of any peer mediators who, any students who are getting trained in peer mediation, that if they missed a class, they can go back and review that. And so the counselor would then work with the students to view that past video, so they could still get the information, which is a great thing, which is one of the advantages, because you know, if students miss a day with the training, then it makes it really hard to kind of go back and relearn those things, and they can kind of fall behind in that aspect if they miss a day or two. So, but having it recorded made it really easy for them to go and back and review it. Okay. So our training that we have for middle school is 10.5 hours long, which is usually done in 90-minute sessions over 7 days. Well, you probably already know that having a student online for 90 minutes is like, it seems like forever. So what we did is we went ahead and shortened that. The content itself was 45 minutes, but we allowed for a full hour so students can move in and move around and navigate and stuff and chat. So so we stretched it out over 14 days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday after school, and having an hour per session, but 45 minutes worth of content. And I believe this helped the students focus a bit more, and it was short enough time where you could get the information, but you know, they weren't like dozing off or anything like that. So that made it more able to where they could still participate fully and not have other things going on. So that's also why the curriculum that we have, it's just as we do in in-person sessions, the curriculum that we have is a mix of, you know, videos, of lectures, of interactive feedback, and of course the mediation practice itself. And I noticed that the students use the chat box like a lot, especially initially, because they were kind of shy, and so when I would ask them questions or we would get any kind of you know, interaction initially, they would do a lot of it through the chat box. So any platform that you use, it's a good tool to have so students can interact, because they really liked that. So you know, they were shy in using the chat box at first, but then by the end of the training, when they got comfortable with me, they were all talking and unmuting themselves and muting themselves, and just, we were, you know, having a blast. So of course they opened up a bit, and that way they got to utilize their communication skills as well. So just some Zoom settings that were really helpful was the chat box being enabled, because you can enable it or disable it. And what we did is that we had it where students could talk to me or any of the hosts personally, but not to each other. Yeah, so we wouldn't have any private conversations going on. And then they were able to mute and unmute themselves, because I think, like a lot of you know, on here that are online, you can't unmute yourself right now. So, but having for peer mediation, that was very useful. So it was recorded, like I said it before, just in case the students missed a class, and they could go over that content with the wonderful counselor that I worked with. And the recording was not shared with anyone but the counselor, and was kept private. And even with parental permission, I thought it would be best not to share anything, to share outside of the peer mediation students that had missed, and then with the counselor in itself. And no other students were allowed to watch. So training was online. So the actual peer mediation training was online. But, you know, and maybe, you know, Shelley could probably talk about this as well, or, you know, if anyone asks the question about doing the peer mediation the peer mediations online, and where we have our regular adult mediations online and that are available, can be done via Zoom. Had a good long chat with the counselor, and it's just not going to happen online with the peer mediation online. And the reason being is because, you know, there is that confidentiality. It's very important. And we teach the students that it's very important as well. But you can't necessarily maintain that confidentiality when, you know, you can't control who's coming in your room, or who's there. Even if they're not necessarily on the screen, you can't control who's going to be there and who's listening. So it becomes a big liability for schools to do the peer mediation online. So confidentiality and privacy is issues that come into play. And then some of the challenges that I noticed is, like I had mentioned before, that students being able to navigate the technology, where I thought, like, oh yeah, these kids, they all know technology, but not necessarily. So especially when it came, because I did part of the forms where, you know, they had their forms, because, you know, we have them fill out a mediation form after they get done with the mediation on who they mediated with, and just like an outcome, just write down what the outcome was, what the solution was, and then the students, they sign it. And so we go over all of these different forms, but, you know, getting that feedback from them when it wasn't like right there in person was quite a challenge, even because at the end of every training too, and this is with the adult trainings as well, at the end of every training, we give a feedback form. So the students that were trained had a hard time filling out that form when it was online, even if it was in a, you know, I gave it to them in a PDF fillable form. And that's not as easy as I would think that it would be, having that PDF fillable form. So, you know, getting that feedback, I had to like work around, okay, PDF doesn't work. Okay, let's try it and put it on Google, and then give them a link so they could take give the feedback. So, you know, challenges like that were how to get their feedback and how to share those forms. Even though we had a Google Doc where they could go in and access all of those forms, and they had the links to those forms, they still had a difficult time going into the Google Docs and being able to access the forms themselves, you know. So that was a bit of a challenge, because, you know, I guess, you know, my assumption, but, you know, that's why I'm telling you all, so now you won't make that assumption that all students are tech savvy. And also the bandwidth was also a challenge as well, because a lot of students had to end up turning off their cameras. They were listening in there and participating in the chat box, but they had to turn off their cameras to save their bandwidth. I mean, and this is right in the middle of Hilo too. So, I mean, it's not even necessarily the students that were more in the jungles like where I live. So the bandwidth problem, the issue is, as I'm sure all teachers are probably realizing, an issue for students. You know, and then you have the typical where, you know, there are people entering and moving around about and having the students being able to focus. And that's why I like to keep the training as interactive as possible and get their feedback, so they're engaged. You know, and also, you know, I'm as you can probably tell, I'm pretty animated. So so I think that helps as well to keep the students engaged. So that was my experience with teaching peer mediation online. Ultimately, I think it's a great tool. This was even though I had worked with the school before and we did the conflict resolution skills for them, with them, and that was in person, but this was the first time we had actually did a peer mediation training, and it was the first time it was online, and peer mediation training for the middle school, by the way, and the first time it was online. But ultimately it worked out well. And then, so the counselor then, because they're not going to do peer mediation online, when the students come back, they may end up having to take a refresher training and then go ahead and be able to be available for peer mediations in person. So, all right, thank you.
Let me unmute myself. Great. Thank you so much, Majida. That's really wonderful. We've got a couple questions, but I think that they're going to end up getting answered through the next couple of people. And then if not, we'll catch you at the end. Thank you so much for sharing about the point of view perspective from a community mediation center that's partnering with these schools to build these programs and having that transition to be online. So from the individual schools, Community Mediation Center, we are now going to have Sue Chang talking about, in general, an overview of peer mediation and building peer mediation programs. And this is really going to be a preview of her more in-depth workshop that's going to be coming up later this month. You can see in the chat Jose has posted when that is and the registration for it. So Susan, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to everybody who helped organize this conference. After our extraordinarily bizarre pandemic year last year that we've all had to go through and are still going through to a large degree, this was a unique experience to organize this in no small effort to Katie and to Jose and the University of Hawaii's Matsunaga Peace Institute. I wanted to cover a number of 3 basic areas, and I'll go as long as my 10 minutes plus allow me to do. We can go in more, if any of you wanted to have more discussion about any of the areas or have some questions or want to add some comments, I do have the more lengthy workshop at the end of the month, and we can open it up for there. The pandemic has changed everything. I don't need to say that at least 14,000 times because I think everybody is very aware of that. And part of what it has changed to a large degree is that because everything now is so much more comfortable online, it raises a whole lot of issues, and you're getting a feedback from that from Shelley and this very dynamic lady. I really enjoy you when you speak because you have so much animation, and that goes to one of the 3 areas that I wanted to address, and that was the necessity for modifying the training according to the group of kids that you're looking at here. But before I get into that, I wanted to make one very important thing. I've been at this since 1989. And I want to start with the fun, because the fun part is standing in front of a classroom of kids, and I guess online you have the same reaction, but standing in front of a classroom full of kids, and as the training is winding up and you're doing probably the last role play simulation, you're circulating around the room. This is when we actually got to be in the room with the mediator kids who were training. You're circulating the room and you realize that there is a number of kids there that actually get it. They understand the power that they can have if they take the time to just take a step back, maybe think about what happened with the conflict and maybe do some problem solving. And probably then if they take the time to do some problem solving, they can figure out a fair way to resolve this problem or at least manage it. And then the second thing you get to feel from some of the kids there is that they recognize that maybe they can actually do peer mediation. They can be an effective peer mediator. And there is nothing for me personally There is nothing more gratifying than to end the training and realize that not everybody in the room, but there's a handful of kids who will dramatically change how they address dealing with conflicts in their own life. Maybe they can help their friends quietly, but that depending on the nature of the formal peer mediation program at the school, they may be very powerful in affecting and helping their classmates. That's why I keep doing this. So before I go into talking a little bit about, from my perspective, making a successful program, it's I think it might be helpful if there's a little bit of history here, because what I'm hearing is I'm a whole different generation. I'm noticing. So I wanted just a little perspective here. Peer mediation in Hawaii really took off from 1986 to 1989 because the Department of Education here received a ginormous grant. Carl Takashita, and Carl's a name that needs, probably nobody here in the room knows who that is, but Carl Takashita was a Department of Education employee. He has since retired. He was trained at the then Neighborhood Justice Center, which is now the Mediation Center of the Pacific. So he was a mediator, and he was put in charge by the DOE of implementing peer mediation in the state of Hawaii. Perfect choice. He understood mediation. He was a Department of Education employee, so he understood how the DOE worked. And he was able to connect with the mediators and with the different school personnel that he had to work with. And he was a backup. He could come in and do the training. He could come in and help. He could help organize the annual conferences. He was available for any kind of backup that schools needed. All of that changed, of course, as is everything else in life changes, as other currents ebb and flow. And with Carl's retirement, an individual named Janie King took over, and then she retired. And peer mediation in the state of Hawaii became one of 15 other things that somebody at the DOE was assigned. So that began the interesting process of maintaining a viable statewide peer mediation program. So what I want to touch on here, and I don't want to sound like the grouchy old lady who lives upstairs, okay? But what I want to touch on here, and it's very important in listening to the other two experts that you just heard, it's really important that if you as an individual person or part of an organization are thinking about possibly implementing a peer mediation program, I would suggest to you that there's a number of things that you really very specifically need to think about. And when my eyes look off to the direction, by the way, I just made some notes here so that I don't forget. You need to be really clear at the organization. I assume it's going to be a school. It doesn't have to be a school. I've worked with after school care programs, college residencies, things like that. But assuming we're all talking about working in the schools, it's really important that you connect with somebody who's going to be responsible for the program and find out from them lots and lots of listening. You find out from them what their goals are. Why are they even discussing implementing a peer mediation program? How will they measure success? What is failure going to look like? The motivation for wanting to implement the program is really, really important, because if it's just the one person on campus who's all committed to it, it's really an uphill battle, because there's no question that once the kids get back on campus, well, even if using the internet and all too, but once they get back on campus, the issue of time is going to be very important. If there needs to be formal training, which there will be, when is that going to take place? If there are going to be mediations that take place on campus, whether the little kids elementary school during recess or it's the middle or high school kids with assigned times, when are those mediations going to take place? What people will find when they're trying to organize a peer mediation program on campus, and I know those of you who've spoke find this to be very, very true, is the schools are basically overwhelmed with expectations and demands. I mean, absolutely overwhelmed. I have had the honor of working with some extraordinary people the last couple of decades or so. And my experience with an awful lot of them is that they are running as fast as they can They are moving as fast as they can. They're dealing with as much as they can. So fair or unfair, what happens when you try to introduce a program like peer mediation is that it's viewed as zero sum. If I have to take time as a teacher to be involved with making the peer mediation program successful, where does that time get taken away from? And the kids, if the kids are going to go to training, if the kids are going to have time to do peer mediate, take time to do the actual mediations themselves, that's taking time away from something else. And whether that's fair or unfair, that's what you have to expect. It's not like there's a lot of time to be spent here and teachers and administrators are trying to figure out ways to fill the time. No, you've got to be, and so if you're going to be talking, if you're an outside person coming in to offer your services, like you folks from the neighbor islands who very much are actively involved in this, you need very specifically to get the feedback from the person who's willing to be the coordinator as to what their expectations are for the program. I would strongly suggest that time be spent doing listening to in interacting with the administrators. If you have an opportunity to make a formal presentation to the faculty, I suggest that get done. It's really, really important that the adults on campus understand what the purpose is of this too. One of the other parts is because one of the other things you're doing is that you're also helping to be sure people are clear as to what mediation is. We are also involved in mediation that maybe we forget. There's an awful lot of people who have no idea what that is. Granted, I don't get as many confusions with meditation anymore. But most people that I interact with who are not involved in the conflict resolution theater really aren't clear about mediation. And so when we're talking about students in particular being involved with mediation, it's really important that it be made clear that the kids are not being trained to be junior police officers. They are not being trained to be counselors. They're not being trained to be arbitrators and decide stuff for the kids because their classmates can't figure this out for themselves. No, you need to be, okay, thank you, Katie. You need to be very clear about what the role of the mediators are so that when you get a program started, then that will be clear to everybody. And it'll be an evolving educational process too. It isn't going to be like there's a magic moment where everybody gets it. But please expect that if you're thinking about helping a school implement a program, you're going to spend a lot of time teaching and educating in a friendly way, in a supportive way, not a combat way or anything, but a supportive way. Okay, I got the 5-minute signal thing, so let me very quickly. There are a lot of details about organizing a peer mediation program apart from making sure that the school that you're working with is on point about what expectations are. When I do the workshop later in the month, I will go over more of those things in more detail because there are some very specific things that I think it would be helpful for you to know. I want to stress one other part here, and that's the issue of confidentiality. As your previous speakers mentioned, it's a huge issue. And if you're working with the schools, all of those kids are minors and parental permission is absolutely necessity for that. There's big debates in the adult mediation community now about whether you should record the mediation sessions themselves. And as you can see from the previous discussion, that runs a real danger that the information that was shared in the confidential mediation session gets disseminated in the school. So that's an issue that in this day of social media absolutely needs to be addressed. And I know there's been questions about the parent thing. It's really important that parents be involved and they know what's expected of the mediators and they're okay with that, with all of that. So again, with all the details of running a pre-mediation program and getting it all set, let me take a step back before my time is up and just the beauty of it, the joy of it is empowering kids to realize that maybe they've got a lot more choices in dealing with the problems that they have to deal with every day. And granted, the problems for an elementary school kid may be different than what a middle school kid has to deal with, because wow, middle school, they have to deal with an awful lot of stuff, right? Or a high school kid, but they're still having to deal with problems. And I don't think we do a really effective, we adults don't tend to do a really effective job of making sure kids understand that they have a lot more choices in dealing with these things than they think they do. They only have to look at us and how we conduct ourselves, and what lessons are they learning from watching us and the news about how we deal with our conflicts. So mediation can be an extraordinarily powerful tool. And I would hope that, I'm just thrilled to death that there's still energy in this state to continue moving forward with this. So let's continue to move forward and train and work with as many kids as we can to empower them to be able to deal with their conflicts in a more effective way. Okay, so did I make the time limit, Katie?
Perfect. That was perfect, Sue. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And if any of you are interested in getting into those details and that nitty-gritty of engaging all levels of the school and really helping to build the program, Susan's workshop is going to be on April 28th. The registration is in the chat. There's a whole list of them along with others in the month, and we'll be following up with her later. So thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, we are going to have Noelani speaking about creative ways to get students engaged and to get the youth involved, and how they can have their entry points into this idea and this world of peer mediation.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. And thank you to our previous presenters. I learn a lot whenever I go to anything where other peers are presenting and sharing things. So also thank you to Jose and Katie for organizing, because I understand how hard it can be, especially virtually. Almost there's some things about virtual that are more difficult to organize, and then participation and all that stuff. So thank you to everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit. I actually have a little presentation that I'm going to give. I work at the West Hawai'i Mediation Center. So I'm the counterpart to Majida over in Hilo. I do like the Kona side. Waimea, Hamakua, Kohala. Kohala is where our pilot program started 9 years ago. So next year will be our 10th anniversary doing peer mediation with the West Hawai'i Mediation Center. However, I do have to say this is my first year in this role. So that has been both, really hard because of the year, but also sort of a blessing in that I've been able to find these creative entryways and get involved with groups and organizations that had no idea who we were and what we do, versus the traditional just with the schools. And we have about 8 schools we work with who still have active programs. A lot just took this last year off because of everything that was happening. I have done 3 trainings with schools that we work with. Like Majida was mentioning, a lot of the students, even though they weren't doing peer mediations actively this year, they really liked doing the training and having that reminder. And I've also kind of tried to form some new relationships, and I've found that it's kind of fun to talk about peace as a broader concept and conflict resolution as a broader concept, as an entryway to work with counselors and work with teachers to be like, hey, maybe I could be in your curriculum in your language arts class. Like, this could be something that we incorporate into a classroom setting if I find a teacher also to work with who is willing to give that time. Because like Sue was saying, and like Majida was saying, and like Shelly, like we're all saying, it's really hard time-wise to find those pockets where A, that even exist, and B, where teachers are willing to give you the time, but also that can kind of relieve a little stress from them. Because ultimately, as myself, like I am a little different than Shelly. I'm not in the school. I'm a nonprofit. We're on the side. So I want to come into a school and be like, hey, this is supposed to like relieve stress for you. This is a time when I can give you a little break and you can facilitate and be on the ground with going forward. But this is like a couple hours where you get to chill, So that's kind of where I came at this from. And I'm just gonna start with, so I'm gonna show my little, where is it? I have to share screen. Oh no. Okay. My Chrome. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Sharing. Oh, I have to share my desktop. Sorry, this is what Majida was talking about with, I'm like one of those kids who's not all that tech savvy. So I believe, well, I am pretty tech savvy, but right when you think you got everything under control, then it's like,
Exactly.
it kind of doesn't do exactly what you wanted to do. So I have this little PowerPoint here. And I'm going to talk about a few ways to kind of find a creative entry into peer mediation. This is something I'm going to go a little more in depth in both my workshops, how to use creative entries into actually the content and using creativity within the content. This doesn't want to reload, even though it says it will. So I'll wait for it. But there's a few ways, there's a lot of ways. So we have, under the concept of art, there's so many entries into art. There's movement, there's music, there is visual art, and then there's also storytelling and theater. And anybody who's done any peer mediation knows that when you do the role plays, you're doing theater. So and anybody who's taught a training knows that that's kind of the funnest part for the kids. Like Susan was mentioning, watching them doing their role plays the last time, and as Majida was also saying, like by the end they're kind of opening up. It's really fun to see the kids get creative with that and find their characters and stuff. So why not use that prior? Like, for one of the things that I do when I'm teaching, this really doesn't want to load. It's really the irony that I actually went into the depth of making a presentation. It's not loading, but I got lots to talk about. So with the kids, what I like to do, like when we're talking about conflict styles, for example, when we're talking about, okay, some people are avoiders, some people tend to be more of that aggressive nature, some people are passive aggressive. I like to do role plays right from the beginning. So like one thing I'll do is I'll pick 2 jars. I love jars. I'll throw in all the different types of conflict responses, and I'll throw in a bunch of pretend conflicts into one jar, and I'll pick a conflict style, and I'll pick a situation, and then one of the students will volunteer, and then they'll play out those roles. So that's like one thing I like to do. Another approach that I really like to take into I'm going to stop sharing that way. I can maybe, yeah. Another thing I like to do when we're talking about basic needs is I really like to explore basic needs using music. So I know that most likely all of our curriculums are slightly different for teaching our different or for all of us for teaching our peer mediations. I'm sure we have different curriculums we've all kind of developed. I know that Majida uses one similar to ours, but in our specific training, we talk about basic needs. So things like having fun and things like freedom, etc. So one thing I like to do is actually use music and put on different songs that encourage these different kind of feelings and let the kids move to it. And I like to bring things into whatever situation. I worked with Kona Dance and Performing Arts at one point, and I used movement in all of their exercises. So we talked about, oh, there it is. Can you guys see it? Yay, oh my God, that was fun. I was like multitasking and trying to organize it. Oh my God. Okay, so we made it. Okay, so I'm gonna continue with the train of thought I'm on, but I love this quote by Maya Angelou. You can't use up creativity. The more you use it, the more you have. And as mediators, we know that creativity is like the building block of what we do, trying to think outside of the box, create solutions and encourage solutions that maybe nobody ever even thought were possible or had considered. So I kind of like this year, my background, sorry, I should say this too. My background is in theater education. taught language using theater. I write original scripts for a local organization, and that's how I actually got in contact with West Hawaii Mediation. I wrote a show 2 years ago called Perspectives, and it was, if anybody wants to use it for any of their classrooms, it was an original dance and theater performance that went through everything from interpersonal conflict to macro conflict, war, dehumanization. And we had partnered with West Hawaii Mediation. So then this year when the position opened up, our director reached out to me, and I was like, actually, yeah, I was gonna be leaving the island, but because of the year, I stayed. So I think that, you know, there's so many ways to approach everything, and everybody's way is right. My background is in theater and the arts, so I always find that's like where I like to enter things from. So, you know, like a little joke, cartoons are art right there. The alligator, the babies are so scared. The babies don't know that the alligator's just chilling, you know, he doesn't know what's happening. Perspectives, finding art in cartoons. I like to incorporate this kind of stuff in my trainings, especially online trainings. I always like to start a training with this question and just go from there, even as we go into the more detailed aspects of peer mediation, just to start on that macro, like what is peace? What do we think about peace? When we're talking about peer mediation, finding resolutions, what does that mean to you? So I do free writes with that. And already that's something that, I mean, I consider writing to be an artistic thing. I like this quote, a good laugh and a long sleep are the two best cures for anything. So maybe just a good laugh makes some people feel peaceful. I love getting the kids answers to this stuff. It's pretty funny. Sometimes it's hilarious. So like I was saying, one entry point is music. And when we're talking about the basic needs, I'll put on different songs and have people listen, and they can either move or they can write, or they can see, like I'll put on a song for 30 seconds. And I'll put different songs that I find to identify with those specific basic needs, and we'll approach it that way. I always like to reference pueos in my training because they have like such a different way of both seeing and hearing the native owl. This is one of my students with my cat. This is a private music student. I also teach music, so I love that picture because it's like the cat's listening, she's listening. We were actually learning some Bob Marley that day. And then we started talking about his role in social change and how music can create change. So theater, I've worked with the Aloha Teen Theater doing workshops on Zoom this year. This picture is on the right is from the show that I wrote with Prince Dance Institute on perspectives. And then another way that this year, you know, it was so weird, and it was especially in the fall, it was really hard to work with schools because everybody was going through so much change. So I partnered with Aloha Teen Theater, and we did an entry kind of into what peer mediation is about in a program we called Characters in Conflict. And we used the script of Mean Girls, if everybody's familiar with Mean Girls, the movie. It's also a musical now. But we used that and did a script reading and went through and kind of analyzed each character and then talked about their conflicts. And it's neat because a lot of these students that I've had in these kind of separate workshops here and there, I've then encountered in training. So it's like they've already been a little bit introduced to what peer mediation is and what conflict is in sort of a different lens. And then if I can come into a school and I already have somebody in the classroom who already took my script class with characters in conflict, then it's like I already have somebody I'm familiar with who's into doing the role playing, who's willing to be a little, you know, that student that kind of gets everybody opening up. This is from a peace camp I just did a couple of weeks ago for spring break. They're doing their role plays at the last bit of the peer mediation training. And I loved it because one of the students was so quiet and like not really interacting so much with the other students. And when they did the role plays, he was like such a goofball. And so it opened up this window for everybody to find a new connection to one another. Creative writing, I've done haiku workshops with some of the with some of the language arts teachers. I'm currently doing a training with Hawaii Tech Academy, and the reason that I first connected with them was I offered an hour-long workshop that the teachers could just have me come in and teach their class for an hour. And I talked about haiku and basho and his role as an active warrior of peace. And then we did these haikus on peace. And then it was like, okay, now I have a relationship with the school. They've seen that I'm an educator, and they're excited to go further and develop actually a program on peer mediation with me. So I've kind of really had to find ways to get schools to be like, yay, yes, come, because they're so overwhelmed. And I found that by creating little portal programs, little like hour-long workshops and stuff, I'm able to kind of get a foot in the door to then be like, okay, now are you guys ready to do a peer mediation program? You know, and so again, some of the kids who've done that, who did this workshop with me, are now in the peer mediation training. So it's kind of like dipping the ink in different places in order to find that whole foot in the door. I love creative writing. I love giving the kids, even in the peer mediation trainings, a chance to really reflect on conflicts that they've had, both on an interpersonal and a macro level. And, you know, put on some music and actually give the time. Like, it's so easy to be like, we have so much information to give them and just roll through it. But I found that, you know, that first minute, if you just ask the question, it's a little awkward and nobody answers. But if you like turn on some music, especially on the Zoom, if you put on some music and just say, see you in 10 minutes, I'm over there thinking like, oh God, nobody's gonna have anything. But we come back and they have like a lot to say when the time's actually given. And it's really fun place to start the conversation about the skills of being a peer mediator from their conflicts, you know, because like Sue was saying, it's such a different world. Our students don't have the same conflicts that I had, you know, 15 years ago going to high school here on the Big Island. They have like a whole different layer of things with social media and all this stuff. So I'm constantly learning, and I like to give them that space to inform me about what's going on so we can approach the skills. And then movement is a big one for me. So I like to do breaths. With my younger kids, I've taught 3rd grade even, and I start always with like a yoga story where I give them poses. And then I say a story where they have to incorporate the poses. So if I teach them like dragon and star and warrior, then I incorporate all those characters and say a story, and I wing it. I improv a story, but always with a conflict and a resolution and some skills in there. And then I reference the story throughout the training. So it's like, oh, remember Rocky, the guy who avoided the conflict because he was the rock next to the tree? And then we have like a place to reference throughout the training. So they don't really realize that we're already doing training, but it's a great way to get them moving. And for me, I find it to be fun. I like to move. So this bottom picture too is from our peace camp. We had a friend of mine come in and teach a hula and a chant about Ku, who is always known as the god of war, but there's a lot more dynamic stuff to him. He's got a lot more going on, and it's a lot more about understanding the self. And so we had movement, and that was a peace camp. It wasn't, we had peer mediation in it, but that was a way I kind of incorporated some movements. And then visual art, of course, this was making signs for things we're passionate about. I like to do collage work as an intro. If I have a longer training with kids, I'll start with collage work where I give them prompts about conflict in their life, and they can cut out stuff. And that's what you see here, this picture. And it's just a chance for them to kind of get to know each other and have, again, that downtime of like absorbing, like, what is this? And give me a little intro into starting to talk about the concepts without it being like, what's the definition of conflict? Like, what's the definition of mediation? You know, just finding some scraps. And I like using, I'm not personally a visual artist, so I like using magazines, you know, pictures and stuff like that, and just cutting it out and cut and paste. Anybody can do that. So that's like one of the ways I enter into the visual art side. In this particular case, we made notebooks, and those were their notebooks that they used throughout the training. And so each of their notebooks, and I'll give different prompts that have to do with conflict resolution and conflict. And it's really fun because it's just some downtime. And again, it's hard to find that time, but it can be so pivotal in setting up the feeling around the training and the engagement around the training. And the more importantly, especially now as people, I mean, I did my first kind of full kids back in person thing a couple weeks ago. And, you know, they're also navigating how to be back in person now that we've been in person or off, you know, online. So kind of giving that space through the art moment to allow them to like settle in and get comfortable with one another. I find it's helpful for me, and I've found it to be helpful, I believe, to them. So I love this quote: what art is in reality is this missing link, not the links that exist. It's not what you see that is art. Art is the gap. So I just find that, you know, especially in this time when there's so many gaps and so many disconnects, using things like music and visual art and theater and these kind of artistic entryways allows those gaps to be and to really recognize that we are in a transition and it is different, and giving the space for our work to be done in a way that is effective. So that is, you know, I had a couple more things planned, but I think I'm out of time, Katie, very much so. Okay, sorry, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Noelani. Thank you so much for showing that there can be a creative and embracing the fun when it comes to peer mediation, getting the kids really involved with it. So we do have a couple of questions, so I'm just going to set this up just a little bit so that I'm gonna have all of you spotlighted up here. So first, and if anybody has any questions who are in the audience, please feel free to put them in the chat. This will be the time when they're getting addressed. One, I don't know if this is a fairly simple one, but some people were wondering, what are the types of conflicts that end up getting mediated through a peer mediation program? What are some of the issues that the students are dealing with? This can be anybody, though I'm looking a little bit at the current practitioners as well.
I know at Kailua High School, most of it's just drama. Usually girls have drama between themselves, usually involves a boy. A lot of times text messaging or any kind of like Snapchat or social media will cause issues or be a big part of issues, because kids will rehash it and like look at that, you know, evidence of, you know, whatever negative thing had happened. So those are major ones. Between sports teams, we'll have issues a lot of times with, you know, blaming people about games or who did what, classroom, just whatever you can imagine.
Who didn't do their assignment, you know, if they were supposed to be doing an assignment together and one person feels the other one isn't. With all the social media, there's no question it's added a whole layer of dynamics. But underlying an awful lot of the issues, as it comes down to, is kids' definition of fair play. What's fair? And I don't think a lot of that has changed a whole bunch, but there's a lot of relationship issues too. And as you folks all know, it's very different the kinds of discussions or conflicts you have at the elementary school level a lot of times than you get at middle school or high school. In middle school and high school, almost always it's relationship issues, right? it's like, really? And so the dynamics have changed. The social media is laid on an awful lot of extra pressure, I think. It tends to involve then a lot more people in the problem because you've got your social media. But underneath, it's still the same kind of relationship issues, I think. that weren't all that different from when I was going to Kailua High School, to be honest with you. It's just that now, now it's really hard to maintain confidentiality or keep an issue private, because it's so easy for, rather than 3 or 4 people in the class to know about it, now there's 10 or 12 that know about it because of the whole social media thing. And it really, in my opinion, it really complicates it, because you're having to try to deal with the original 2 people or 2 or 3 people that are involved with, but there's also all these other people that got linked into it. And sometimes then it's really important at the end of the mediation that very specific commitments get made, that either you're going to get back to certain people and clear the air, or you need to stop, drop it. And that everybody agrees that that's what needs to happen. So, and then the other 3 as to what your experiences are too in that regard.
Yeah. Noelani, Majida, did you want to add anything to that, or? Okay. All right. Another question was talking about asking about the adult supervision kind of during peer mediation, like how involved are the counselor, the representative from the mediation center during the actual mediation itself.
So that's one of the issues we have on campus when we do mediations, and that's probably why we have so few. Just getting buy-in from everybody involved, including our administrators. What they would like to see is a counselor there. So we're within earshot of them doing the mediation the whole time. Sometimes I've even sat in on that, but I don't like to. I've had security sit in on mediations as well, but I appreciate just the kids just being there themselves and just me. That's my perfect place where they can just be handling the mediation on their own, and I'm just within earshot. Just if they need help, I'm there.
That's one of the that's one of the program issues that gets involved too. Absolutely, Shelley, because and it's been an ongoing issue. At one mediation, one of the disputants got so upset that they jumped across the table and attacked the other disputant. That rarely happens, okay? But somehow that example always seems to make the coconut wireless, right? So, you know, where the school that particular high school dealt with the issue then of confidentiality of the sessions by leaving the door open, literally. The counselor who ran the program would sit in the other room, could not really hear what was going on with the mediation, but because the door was open, if the mediators felt things were getting out of control, they could call out to the counselor to come in. But it's the whole thing about, again, you know, you're talking about minors and confidentiality and trying to have the school be comfortable with what they're charged to do in terms of protecting the students who are there and making sure everything is good for them. And the students need some time that, you know, how candid will they be if the counselor is sitting there? If the counselor is sitting there, why do you need the mediators, right? And, so maybe they'll be a little more candid about things if it's just the students in the room. But it's one of the issues that has to be specifically dealt with at each school, is where are they going to draw the line of confidentiality?
Absolutely. Okay. And then would you be able to share any sort of, I mean, keeping confidentiality and names as you need to, but would you be able to share any sort of transformation or effect that you have seen on the students who have engaged with peer mediation? Something that you've seen that of how they've developed, or what kind of effect that it's had on them.
I'd like to speak on that, because so I've worked with several different schools, and this kid pops up in my mind when you ask that, who I taught peer mediation in 4th grade. So I believe he's like a 6th grader, 7th grader right now. So it was a few years back, and you know, he's a little hard of hearing. So, you know, I would kind of do my best to kind of be there, and so he could see and understand what we were, what was going on. But I think, you know, because now that we started peer mediation in middle school, and now he's in middle school, I saw that he was still there and still wanting to be a peer mediator. And I noticed that with a couple of other students as well, because even though they may not necessarily be peer mediate, or they may not actually mediate during the school year for whatever reason, but the skills that they use and the interest that's generated, I see further on, you know. And I mean, and you know, like we live on a small big island too, so it's really nice to see, you know, I'm walking through Home Depot and some kid comes up to me and like, hey, you're the peer mediation lady, you know. So you know, and the parents like, what's that? And then, you know, the kid starts explaining, yeah, peer mediation, this is what it is, mom, don't you know? You know, so it's really neat to see that. And it's really neat to see the progression, because I've been doing it for a few years now. And so seeing the students progress, and and to even touch on to that, not just the students themselves, but the counselors, I found the biggest advocates and the biggest teachers that are advocates for peer mediation have taken basic mediation training themselves, so that they have some kind of connection with mediation. And so it just, I think it works. It's a lasting impact, even though it's not necessarily just right there in your face, like you have all these objective outcomes, but it's something that is long term. Because even still, we have, you know, I'll be in doing a mediation, and an adult will be like, oh yeah, I remember that. I took peer mediation when I was a student. And so even still, it's a long lasting impact that I see. So
I wanted to connect to that because I went kind of full circle with it again, I guess, because I feel like I went full circle as an intern. And then actually one of my peer education students became my intern for counseling about 4 or 5 years ago. And she was involved with me in the training more students in mediation, and then even going to the Peer Mediation Conference. I don't know if she remembered Sue, but it was just really cool to have that. And then my daughter is actually in my peer mediation program this year too. So super cool as a parent to see her using little skills that we teach in class. So.
Yeah, and I'll say something about that too. I've been doing this a shorter time than everybody else, but like been an educator for a long time, and it's just interesting to see how you know, Shelly had mentioned that it's not the kids you think, like typically it's not the A students, whatever. And just in this last year, I've had so many parents reach out to me, and like a lot of the after school stuff I've done and things where they're like, just so you know, if she acts out like this, just like she's got a lot going on, whatever. So and so he doesn't talk much, but blah, blah, blah. Kind of parents giving me like these disclaimers, which, you know, bless them. But I'm like, I don't know, they nailed it, you know, like they're, especially I think of this one dancer when I did a program, we did active listening and basic needs through dance. And oh my God, it was all improv choreography. These are dancers who do dance, they're middle school age, but her choreography was just incredible. Like I would have shown this here, but I didn't have that permission from the Kona Dance Performing Arts Studio, so I didn't share that reel, but it was just so impactful. And I remember her saying like, wow, like she got to be heard in her language as well. It wasn't just the peer mediation concepts and the skills, but it was like through her language of dance, which is her free space, her space where she's empowered. And it was just really incredible because the teacher was like, whoa, you know, like her actual dance teacher was like, I didn't see that coming. So it's kind of neat because it's a little pocket that gives students who don't always get that, the accolades and whatnot, a chance to really shine in something that, like Medita said, they're going to use for the rest of their lives. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, if I can add to, one of the things when you're organizing a program too, to exactly what you folks are saying, exactly to the point, is that one of the things you need to be really clear with the school that you're organizing with is that the mediators who come, particularly the first class that comes through there, really needs to be a cross section of the kids. It's not the student, it's not just the student council kids. It's not just the, you know, the prom queens, okay? And conversely, you don't want a group full of kids who would really benefit from getting this training, okay? Because in the end, if they're going to be able to help their peers, which is the goal, it's not counseling. If they're going to be able to help their peers, there's got to be some kind of built-in respect right off the bat. And if you've got a group of kids who would really benefit from getting this kind of training, you're asking them to do an uphill battle, because the rest of the kids, the peers that they're going to try to mediate, aren't going to be giving them any kind of credit or respect. So what really helps is if the other kids on campus can look at the mediation team and see themselves in at least one of the kids that are there as part of the team. That it really is a cross section. The teams that are the most successful, in my opinion, in observation, are the teams that really, really reflect a cross section of the kids that are on campus. In all of the terms, not just in gender and ethnicity and all that kind of stuff, but also in personality, because they'll have the most chance of being successful. And in the end, that's what you want them to help them be, is you want to help them be successful as peer mediators. So that when the training is all POW and they go out into a program, which hopefully has been very well organized before they get out there and do actual mediations, they'll have a chance to be listened to and respected. To everybody's point here. One little side story. Do we have time, Katie, for me?
We have like a minute, so.
Okay,
Go
one little side story. Because and one of the things I'll go into a little more at the end of the month, but it's really important that in all of you who come in from your organizations, the two of you who come in from your organizations go into a school, you already know this. Every school has its own culture. And it's really important that if you're going in, especially if you're going in as an outsider to help a school implement a program, that you understand the culture of the school that's there. And the reason I say that is that there's a wide variety of materials that can be used to train kids. If they're used to being talking in full paragraphs, that's one thing. If they tend to be used to talking in short sentences, or you're working with a group of kids who are deaf, you need to be able to know where the kids start and what will connect them to what you're trying to teach them. And so whether it's through dance and all this kind, the things that Noelani's talking about too, it's important that you know the culture of the school that you're going to be working with and plug into what will help your program succeed more than any other thing. I worked with a young boy. I just adored him. He was loud and always in trouble, but he had the ability to understand people and read people. He was fourth grader. He could read people just beautifully, but he couldn't control his language. So he was asked to leave the mediation team at one point. I requested a chance to meet and talk with him. And we had a really interesting conversation. I've often wondered what happened to him because he was just this incredible young man who understood people, but it was hard for him to use language that wasn't mean-spirited. So he didn't make it as a mediator, which is too bad. But that's the fun you have when you're doing the training, is you get a chance to interact with all these different kids and all these different personalities. And it's really transformative for us as the teachers, right? Ladies, I mean, it's as transformative for us as it is for the kids we're working with. So thank you guys for all participating today.
Yes, and thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who is joining us here today and who's been listening and asking questions. And thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing in encouraging peer mediation in Hawaii and encouraging the growth and full development of the whole person, looking into peace and conflict resolution of the youth of Hawaii. And so if this has sparked your interest to know a little bit more about peer mediation and how the students learn and about programs and everything, I really encourage you to go to the Eventbrite and to sign up for some more of these workshops and find some students that you know who are within your sphere of influence and ask them to sign up as well and see if they can participate in any of these workshops. The ones from the Kailua High School students are going to be really interesting. Each one is very skills-based. We're really covering the gamut of it. And hopefully this is the beginning of a long adventure for all of you into peer mediation and having peer mediation in your communities. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.